This episode from Driving with Gloves is about a rear-engine, rear-wheel drive car powered by Mercedes-Benz. Hi, my name is Cor and welcome to my channel, Driving with Gloves. I always drive with car gloves. Your question might be, why do I drive with gloves? And my answer is, why not? If you look at the history of Mercedes-Benz, you do not think about rear-engined, rear-wheel drive cars, because in our minds, that's Porsche territory. But I can tell you, you are completely wrong, because even in pre-Mercedes times, the cars from the later Mercedes-Benz were rear-engined, rear-wheel drive cars. The patent motor car from Carl Benz was rear-wheel drive and had an engine in the rear. And so was the motor carriage from Gottlieb Daimler. After the foundation of Mercedes-Benz in 1926, it took a few years until Mercedes-Benz launched their actual first rear-engined, rear-wheel drive model, the W23-130 model from 1934. Mercedes-Benz seriously began exploring the possibility of building a mid-engine sports car during the 1960s.
In 1965, the designers Battistella and Braque jointly penned a mid-engine coupe known as the SLX. The low-slung coupe never progressed beyond prototype stage, and it was never fitted with an engine.
While the SLX project was shelved, the C101 was finished in 1967. On the Frankfurt Motor Show of 1969 it was presented to the public, and Peugeot was making fuss again against a mid-engined rear-wheel drive sports car from Germany, as they did in 1963. Because in 1963 Porsche had to rename the 901 into 911, and it was the same procedure in 1969, because Mercedes-Benz had to rename the C101 in C111. I must admit that I fooled you a bit, because the sound you hear is not made by this car, because the sound this car makes is not impressive at all. So did I lie to you all the time? No, only about the sound. But you should be aware that we live in a time of fake news.
But I am really driving a two-seater rear-engined rear-wheel drive with an engine from Mercedes-Benz, and it is even built by Mercedes-Benz, and the car has a sequential gearbox. But have you never asked yourself why supercars only have two seats? Well, that was the main question in this commercial.
But today I have the opportunity to drive the first generation of this very clever car built by Mercedes-Benz, which is in production for more than 20 years now. And today I am driving the convertible version. And I suppose that you will know it by now. This episode from Driving with Gloves is about the Smart Fortwo. But it was launched in the year 1998 as the Smart City Coupe, whereafter in the year 2000 the Smart Cabrio, the convertible, was launched. In 2003 there was a facelift. In 2004 it was renamed in Smart Fortwo, because in 2004 they launched the 4.4, which is a four-seater. But in this episode from Driving with Gloves, I am driving this Smart Cabrio, the convertible, from the year 2006. But if you think that this is about driving a sardine tin, you are completely wrong. And I'm quite tall, and look at the space I have in this car. So this car was made by a genius, because the cabin is very narrow, so they placed the passenger seat more to the rear, so the driver and the passenger do not touch each other.
If you look at all these cars, you see that there is only one person sitting in the car. Most of the time you sit alone in a car, perhaps you have once in a while a passenger on board. This was recognized both by Mercedes-Benz and by the brilliant Nicolas Hayek, the founder of the Swatch Group. In the 1980s, Mercedes-Benz worked on a city car, the NAVA. NAVA stands for Nahverkehrsfahrzeug, in other words, city car.
Whoa! Sorry, I just had to vomit because it was definitely the ugliest car I've ever seen.
In the meantime, also Nicolas Hayek was working on a Swatch car. His vision was to develop a car which was small and extremely economical. Therefore he worked together with Volkswagen. But the moment Volkswagen jumped off, Mercedes-Benz came on the scene.
In 1994, Hayek founded together with Daimler-Benz a very clever company called Smart.
Smart stands for Swatch, Mercedes and Art.
And I think the name they created was very smart.
Smart was founded in Bienne in Switzerland, so it was initially a Swiss car make. But during the development of the City Coupe, Hayek left the company because he disagreed with Mercedes-Benz about the drive technology used. So Hayek sold his share to Daimler-Benz in 1998. In the 1980s, Hayek boosted the image of Swiss watches with his idea of a fashionable, not too expensive watch. And this is what I used to call my own in these days. No, I do not mean these booties, but I mean this Swatch. I wore this Swatch until the mid-1990s, so it was quite obvious that I was aware of the Swatch car called Smart.
I test drove the new Smart very shortly after its launch in 1998, and I bought one very soon afterwards. I even traveled through Europe with my Smart car, and even then I drove my Smart with gloves. And people laughed at me, but I didn't care, well, except for one time. There were two hot girls looking at me when I walked to my Smart car and drove away. After that I sold my car. Well, what a fool I was. And I hear you thinking, such a tall guy in such a small car, that must be absolutely unsafe. Well, I will tell you something. Life isn't safe at all. And you get the most pleasure about surviving unsafe things. And I must admit, I'm a thrill seeker.
One of the major problems with very small light automobiles is that they can be unsafe in a collision. The smart solution is the Tritium steel safety shell. This hemispherical steel cage encloses the interior of the car and also forms the bulk of the Smart chassis. A small energy-absorbing crumpled zone at the front of the car lessens impacts, and the engine lives in the rear of the car instead of the front. So you have quite a big crumpled zone in the front, and if the car is hit from the rear, the engine will translate underneath the car and not in the passenger compartment.
So all the classic cars I normally drive are way more dangerous than this little Smart. So let's hit the pedal to the metal.
In 1998 there were no cars in this range. It took years before Toyota launched the IQ, and it took even more years before they rebadged the Toyota IQ into an Aston Martin Signet.
Oh dear, Aston Martin, you should be ashamed of yourself. And I'm well aware of the purpose of the Aston Martin Signet. But Mercedes-Benz did a better thing.
Because Mercedes-Benz developed and created a new class and did not name it Mercedes-Benz but Smart. And Hayek was right, the car is classless. It makes no difference if you are poor or rich, or if you are snobby or not. This car was made for everyone. I see it as the modern interpretation of the Citroën 2 Chevaux, or the old Leyland Mini, or the Volkswagen Beetle, or the Fiat 500, although the Smart is not as pretty as the Fiat Cinquecento.
I personally think that the Smart is rather ugly. It's too high, too narrow, too short to become a pretty car. But it was purpose built, and if you look at the interior, I think it's rather smart. Thank you very much for watching this episode from Driving with Gloves. And yes, I didn't drive this Smart from the first generation in city traffic today because I drove it in the beautiful mountains of Canterbury. And yes, you can use a Smart in the mountains without any problem. So if you like this video, please thumbs up and do not forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel Driving with Gloves. Thank you. See you next time in a new episode from Driving with Gloves.